The gunshot cracked through the warehouse before Elena Voss even understood she was in danger. She had come to the old Riverside building at midnight, carrying a folder of documents she believed would finally explain her father's death. She had not expected armed men. She had not expected to be grabbed from behind, a hand clamped over her mouth, her folder ripped from her fingers and tossed aside. She had not expected to be dragged through a side door into a room lit only by a single hanging bulb, where a man sat waiting with the stillness of someone who had never once been surprised in his life. Dante Marchetti did not stand when she was pushed into the room. He simply looked at her, his eyes moving from her face to her shaking hands to the folder now lying open on the table before him, its pages scattered by rough handling. "Who sent you?" he said. It was not a question. It was a demand, spoken so quietly that the two guards behind Elena straightened at the sound of it, as if the room itself had grown colder. Elena's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had heard stories about this man for years, the head of the Marchetti family, a name spoken only in careful whispers in the part of the city she had grown up in. She had told herself she would never come near him, and yet here she was, standing in front of him, with nowhere to run. "No one sent me," she said, forcing her voice to stay even. "I came on my own." Dante's eyes narrowed slightly. He picked up one of the scattered papers, glanced at it, then set it down again without comment. "A woman walks into one of my buildings in the middle of the night, carrying financial records that should not exist outside a locked vault, and she expects me to believe she came on her own. It's the truth. Then tell me who you belong to." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to step back, though the guards behind her left no room to move. "Every person who walks into my world belongs to someone, a family, an enemy, an employer who sent them to spy. So tell me, who do you belong to?" The question hung in the air, sharp as the edge of a blade. Elena felt the old grief rise in her chest, the grief she had carried for 3 years, ever since the night her father had been found dead in his study, his files missing, his death recorded as an accident by people who never once investigated it properly. "I belong to no one," she said. "I belong to the truth, and the truth is in those papers you just threw across your table." Something shifted in Dante's face. It was not fear. Fear was not something Elena imagined this man capable of. But it was something close to attention, the kind of sharp focus a predator gives when it senses that what stands before it is not ordinary prey. He gathered the scattered papers slowly, deliberately, and studied the pages one at a time, while the room stayed silent except for the faint hum of the bulb overhead. Elena watched his expression change from irritation to something more careful as he read. He was looking at columns of numbers, transaction records, a name circled in red ink that Elena had traced for 3 years through half a dozen shell companies. "Where did you get these?" he finally asked. "They belonged to my father, before he was killed for trying to expose them." Dante looked up at her again, and this time his gaze held a different weight. "Your father's name. Adrian Voss." The name did something to him. Elena could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his fingers stilled against the papers. He knew the name. She was certain of it. "Take her to the mansion," he said to the guard standing closest to the door. "Alive, untouched. I want to speak with her properly, not in a warehouse at midnight." Elena's stomach dropped. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "You misunderstand your position," Dante said, standing now, his full height making the room feel smaller. "You walked into my territory, carrying evidence that implicates people I have spent years trying to identify. You are either the greatest threat I have encountered in a decade, or you are the answer to a question that has cost me more than you could imagine. Either way, you are coming with me, and you will not be harmed unless you give me a reason to change my mind." There was no room to argue. 2 guards flanked her, and though neither touched her roughly, the message was clear. She was not being given a choice. The drive to the mansion took nearly an hour, winding through quiet roads Elena did not recognize, past iron gates that opened only after a guard exchanged a few clipped words into a radio. When the car finally stopped, she stepped out into the cool night air and found herself standing before a house so large it seemed to swallow the darkness around it, its windows glowing faintly gold, its grounds patrolled by men who moved like shadows along the tree line. Dante walked ahead of her without looking back, expecting her to follow, and something about his certainty that she would made her angry enough to keep pace with him rather than trail behind like a prisoner. Inside, the mansion was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if noise itself had been trained out of the household. A young woman appeared at the top of a wide staircase, her arms crossed, her expression sharp with suspicion the moment she saw Elena. "Who is this?" the woman asked, her eyes flicking between Dante and the papers still in his hand. "Sophia, not now," Dante said, though his tone held none of the coldness he had used in the warehouse. There was something almost tired in it, the voice of a man carrying more than he let anyone see. Sophia did not move from the staircase. "You bring a stranger into this house in the middle of the night and you tell me not now? Dante, after everything that has happened, after everything we have lost, you cannot simply—" "She is Adrian Voss's daughter." The name stopped Sophia mid-sentence. Her arms uncrossed slowly, and for a moment the sharpness in her expression gave way to something unreadable, something almost like grief. She looked at Elena properly then, taking in her face as though searching for a resemblance to a man she must have once known. "That is not possible," Sophia said quietly. "It is," Dante replied, "and she has been carrying his files for 3 years, trying to find out who killed him." Elena watched the exchange with growing confusion. Her father's name meant something in this house, something that went beyond a simple business connection. She had spent 3 years assuming her father's death was tied to a single family, the Kovacs, whom he had once advised before discovering what they were truly hiding. She had never imagined the Marchetti family had any connection to him at all. "I want answers," Elena said, her voice cutting through the tension between Dante and Sophia. "You clearly knew my father. You clearly know something about what happened to him. I have spent 3 years trying to find the truth, and I am not leaving this house until someone tells me what that truth is." Dante turned to look at her, and for the first time since the warehouse, something like respect flickered behind his eyes. "You are not going anywhere tonight, regardless of what you want," he said. "But you will have your answers. Not all of them tonight. Some of them, perhaps not for a while. But I give you my word that you did not come here for nothing." "Your word means very little to me," Elena said. "You are a man half the city fears to even mention by name. And yet here you are, standing in my home, speaking to me as though you fear nothing at all." A faint, almost reluctant smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Perhaps that is why I am inclined to keep you close, rather than send you away." Sophia stepped down from the staircase, studying Elena with new interest now, though the wariness had not fully left her face. "You should know," she said, "that no one who learns what this family truly deals with is ever allowed to simply walk away afterward. If Dante is bringing you into this house, it is not a small thing. It is not a kindness. It is a decision that will change your life, whether you want it to or not." Elena felt the weight of those words settle over her, heavy and undeniable. She thought of her father's quiet study, of the night she had found him, of the years spent chasing shadows and half-truths because no one else seemed willing to look. She had wanted answers for so long that the danger of finally finding them had never fully occurred to her. "Then let it change," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. "I did not come this far to walk away now." Dante studied her for a long moment, as though weighing something only he could see. Then he nodded once, a small motion, but one that seemed to settle a decision in the room. "Show her to a room," he told Sophia, "the East Wing, and post someone outside her door, not to imprison her, but to keep her safe. If what she carries is real, there are people who will want her silenced before she learns anything more." Sophia's eyes widened slightly at that. clearly understanding an implication Elena did not yet grasp. "You think they already know she is here?" "I think," Dante said slowly, "that a folder like this does not simply disappear from a warehouse without someone noticing it is gone. And if the wrong people learn that Adrian Voss's daughter has been alive and searching this entire time, they will not wait long to correct that mistake." The words settled over Elena like cold water. She had spent 3 years being careful, always checking behind her, always assuming she was invisible to the people she was investigating. She had never once considered that stepping into this world so directly might have already put a target on her back that no amount of caution could undo. "Am I safe here?" she asked quietly. Dante's expression did not soften, but something in his voice did. "Safer than anywhere else you could have gone tonight. That much I promise you." It was not a comforting answer. It was, if anything, a confirmation of exactly how much danger she was truly in. But there was something in the way he said it, something steady and certain, that made her believe him despite every instinct telling her she should not trust a man like Dante Marchetti at all. Sophia led her up the staircase, and down a long corridor lined with paintings that seemed older than the house itself, past closed doors and dim lamps, until they reached a room at the far end of the east wing. It was simple compared to what Elena had expected. A bed, a window overlooking the dark grounds, a small writing desk near the wall. "Rest if you can," Sophia said, though her tone suggested she doubted Elena would manage it. "Tomorrow will bring more questions than tonight gave you answers." When the door closed and Elena was finally alone, she sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself, for the first time in hours, to feel the full weight of what had happened. She had walked into a warehouse searching for proof of her father's murder, and she had walked out of it into the home of one of the most powerful and feared men in the city, carrying secrets that apparently connected them both in ways she did not yet understand. She thought of the way Dante's expression had changed when he read her father's name. She thought of Sophia's grief-filled reaction to it. Whatever the truth was, it ran deeper than a single betrayal, deeper than a single death. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope, sharp and dangerous, that she was finally close to understanding what had truly happened to her father. Outside her window, she could see a guard positioned near the tree line, exactly as Dante had promised. She was not free. She was not simply a guest. But she was, for the moment, protected, and after 3 years of searching alone in the dark, that protection felt like the first solid ground she had stood on in a very long time. She did not know yet how deep the connection between her father and this family truly went. She did not know that the folder she had carried into that warehouse held only a fraction of the truth, or that the answer to Dante's question, "Who do you belong to?" would eventually become the most important thing either of them had ever asked or answered. But as she lay awake that night, listening to the quiet movements of guards outside her door, she understood one thing clearly. There was no going back to the life she had lived before. Whatever waited for her inside the walls of this mansion, whatever secrets the Marchetti family had buried alongside her father's, she was now a part of it, whether she had chosen it or not. And somewhere down the hall, in a study lit only by a single lamp, Dante Marchetti sat with Adrian Voss's files spread across his desk, reading through the night, piecing together a truth he had spent years trying to uncover, a truth that had just walked through his door wearing the face of a woman who reminded him, more than he wanted to admit, of everything he had once lost and everything he still had left to protect. The house around them stayed silent, its walls holding secrets old and new, waiting for morning to bring the questions neither of them was fully ready to answer. A sharp knock on Elena's door pulled her out of sleep before the sun had fully risen, and before she could even sit up, the door opened without waiting for her answer. "Get dressed," Sophia said, stepping inside with a folded set of clothes in her arms. "Dante wants you downstairs in 20 minutes. Something happened overnight, and he does not like to be kept waiting." Elena rubbed the sleep from her eyes, her body still stiff from the tension of the night before. What happened? That is exactly what he wants to discuss with you. Sophia set the clothes on the end of the bed and crossed her arms, studying Elena with the same guarded curiosity she had shown the night before. You should know something before you go down there. My brother does not trust easily. If he brought you into this house instead of leaving you in that warehouse, it is because he believes you matter to something bigger than either of you. Do not waste that. Elena dressed quickly and followed Sophia down the same long corridor, past the paintings that looked even older in the pale morning light, and down the wide staircase into a room she had not seen the night before, a study filled with bookshelves and a heavy wooden desk where Dante sat waiting, her father's folder spread out in front of him alongside several new pages she did not recognize. "Sit," he said, not unkindly, gesturing to the chair across from him. Elena sat, her eyes drawn immediately to the unfamiliar pages on the desk. "What is that?" "Records my own people, pulled together overnight, cross-referenced against your father's files." Dante leaned back, studying her with the same sharp attention he had shown in the warehouse, though something in his posture had shifted. Less suspicion now, more careful calculation. Your father was not simply an accountant who stumbled onto something he should not have seen. He was tracking a pattern of movement between two rival organizations, mine and the Kovic family. Money passing through channels meant to look legitimate, but funding something neither family officially sanctioned. Elena's pulse quickened. "I know. I found the same pattern years ago, but I could never prove who was behind it inside your organization. I always assumed it was someone loyal to you." "It was someone I trusted." Dante's voice hardened slightly. "Someone close enough to move money without raising questions, close enough to know which records to alter and which to destroy. Your father found the trail because he was thorough in a way most people are not. That thoroughness is what got him killed." The confirmation of what she had suspected for years settled over Elena with a strange mixture of grief and relief. She had spent so long chasing shadows, half convinced she was imagining connections that were not truly there. Hearing Dante confirm it so plainly made the pain sharper, but it also made the path forward clearer than it had ever been. "Who?" she asked, her voice tight. "Who inside your organization was working with the Kovacs?" "I do not know yet." "That is the truth I have been chasing for nearly as long as you have been chasing yours." Dante tapped the edge of the folder. "But your father's records, combined with what my people have gathered since, narrow the possibilities significantly. There are perhaps 3 men close enough to me who could have managed this without detection. I intend to find out which one." Elena studied him, trying to reconcile the calculating, dangerous man in front of her with the fact that he was, in this moment, treating her less like a prisoner and more like a partner in something neither of them had been able to solve alone. "Why are you telling me this? Last night you thought I might be a spy. Last night I did not yet understand what you carried." Dante's eyes held hers, steady and unreadable. "Your father died trying to expose corruption that threatens both our worlds. You have spent 3 years continuing his work at great risk to yourself. Whatever else you are not my enemy. And in my experience, it is far more dangerous to leave someone like you outside my protection than within it." The words settled between them, heavier than either of them acknowledged aloud. Elena looked down at the folder, at the pages of her father's careful handwriting, numbers and names circled in red ink that had haunted her for years, and felt something inside her ease slightly, the isolation of 3 years of searching alone finally cracking open into something shared. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you stay here, where I can keep you safe while we work through what remains of this investigation. My men will continue digging into the 3 names I mentioned. You will help me understand your father's records in ways my people cannot, since you have studied them longer than anyone. And if I refuse to stay..." Dante's expression did not change, but something in his voice grew quieter, more deliberate. "Then, I cannot guarantee your safety once you walk out that door. Whoever killed your father is still out there, still protected by whatever position they hold in my organization. And the moment they learn his daughter has resurfaced carrying his files, they will not hesitate to finish what they started 3 years ago. The blunt honesty of the statement was somehow more convincing than any attempt at persuasion would have been. Elena thought of the warehouse, of how easily she had been caught, of how close she had likely come to disappearing the same way her father had. She thought of the years spent looking over her shoulder, never quite certain if the danger was real or imagined, and realized that for the first time she was being offered actual protection instead of vague warnings to be careful. "I'll stay," she said, "but I want to be part of this. Not locked away in a room upstairs while your men do the real work. I have spent 3 years understanding these records. I deserve to be part of finding out who is responsible." For a moment, Dante studied her in silence, and Elena wondered if she had pushed too far too quickly. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth lifted in something close to approval. "Sophia was right about you." What did she say? That you did not seem like someone who would be content simply hiding in a room upstairs. He stood, gathering the folder and the new pages together. "Very well, you will work with me directly on this, but you will follow the security measures my people put in place, without argument, no matter how unnecessary they might seem to you." Elena nodded, though the reality of what she had just agreed to was beginning to settle over her fully. She was no longer simply a woman searching quietly for answers about her father's death. She was now embedded inside the very organization she had spent years investigating from the outside, working alongside a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by the strange, careful respect he seemed to be extending to her now. Over the following days, Elena found herself settling into a rhythm inside the mansion that she never could have anticipated. Mornings were spent in Dante's study, going through records together, matching names and dates, narrowing the list of suspects with a methodical patience that reminded her, painfully, of her father's own careful approach to his work. Afternoons often included tense meetings with Dante's closest men, during which Elena watched carefully, cataloging reactions, searching for the smallest flicker of guilt or discomfort that might reveal which of them had betrayed the family from within. Sophia, despite her initial wariness, slowly warmed toward her, the two women finding unexpected common ground in their shared frustration with the secrecy and danger that surrounded them both. Over quiet dinners, Sophia spoke carefully about the family's history, about losses she rarely mentioned to outsiders, about the weight her brother carried in trying to hold together an organization built on loyalty that could not always be trusted. "He does not let people close," Sophia said one evening, watching Elena from across the table with an expression that was difficult to read. "Not since our parents died, not since he learned exactly how easily loyalty can be bought, but he has let you close faster than anyone I can remember." Elena did not know how to respond to that, uncertain whether it was meant as a warning or an observation, or perhaps something closer to both. By the end of the first week, the list of suspects had narrowed to 2 names, both men who held positions of significant trust within Dante's organization, both with access to the kind of financial oversight that would have allowed them to move money without detection. Elena watched as Dante grew quieter, more focused, the weight of narrowing in on a betrayal within his own ranks, settling visibly over him despite his attempts to remain composed. "It has to be one of them," he said one night, staring at the 2 names written on a single sheet of paper, the lamp on his desk casting long shadows across the study. "And when I find proof, there will be no mercy for whichever one it is." Elena, standing beside him, studied the names carefully, something uneasy stirring in her chest. What if it isn't either of them? What if we're missing someone? Dante looked up at her, his expression sharpening. "What makes you say that?" "Because my father's notes mention someone with access to information neither of these men would necessarily have, someone close enough to the Kovacs side of the operation to understand exactly how they structured their concealment. I don't think either of these men has that kind of connection." The observation settled over the room heavily, and Elena watched as Dante's expression shifted from confidence to something more uncertain, the careful narrowing of suspects they had spent a week constructing, suddenly feeling far less solid than it had moments before. "Then we start again," he said quietly, "and this time we look more carefully at who truly has connections on both sides." Neither of them yet realized how close that answer already was, hidden not among strangers, but among the very people who moved freely through the mansion's halls, trusted enough to walk unquestioned past guards who would have stopped anyone else. And as the days continued to pass, that closeness would soon become the most dangerous truth either of them had yet to uncover. A file went missing from Dante's study 3 nights later, and the moment Elena noticed it, her stomach dropped with a certainty that something had gone terribly wrong. "It was here yesterday," she said, searching frantically through the stacks of papers on the desk, her hands trembling slightly. "The summary I put together, comparing the Kovac shell companies to the transfers inside your organization. It's gone." Dante crossed the room quickly, his expression darkening as he checked the drawers and shelves himself, confirming what Elena already knew. "Who has been in this room?" "Only the people you trust," Elena said, and the implication of her own words settled over her as she spoke them. "Which means, whoever took it is someone close enough to walk in here without raising suspicion." Dante's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing, staring at the empty space on the desk where the file had been. Then he turned and walked out of the room without a word, and Elena hurried after him, following him down the corridor toward the security office, where 2 of his men monitored the mansion's cameras. "Pull the footage from this room," Dante ordered, his voice sharp with barely controlled anger. "Last 24 hours. The men worked quickly, and within minutes, grainy footage appeared on the screen, showing the study from a high angle. Elena watched with Dante as the hours ticked by in fast motion, the room empty, then briefly occupied by a cleaning staff member, then empty again. Just after midnight, a figure entered the frame, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there, someone who did not check over their shoulder or hesitate at the door. Dante froze the footage and stared at the screen, and Elena watched the color drain slightly from his face as he recognized the man captured in the frame. "Marco," he said quietly, the name landing in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Elena did not know the name well, only that Marco had been mentioned briefly during her time at the mansion, a longtime associate of Dante's, someone who had worked alongside him for years and had never once appeared on the narrowed list of suspects they had built together. "He wasn't on our list," Elena said carefully. "No," Dante said, his voice tight, "because I trusted him completely. He has been at my side since before I took control of this family. If he is the one working with the Kovacs, then everything I believed about loyalty within this organization has been a lie." The betrayal in his voice was unmistakable, and Elena felt a pang of sympathy for him despite everything she knew about the world he ruled. She understood, more than most, what it meant to have someone close to you turn out to be something other than what they seemed. Her own father had trusted people who had ultimately allowed his death to be dismissed as an accident rather than investigated properly. "We need proof before we act," Elena said. "If Marco realizes we suspect him, he could destroy whatever remains of the evidence. Or worse, warn the Kovacs that we are close to exposing the connection." Dante nodded slowly, though the tension in his shoulders did not ease. "Agreed. We move carefully. But I want eyes on him constantly starting tonight, and I want to know exactly where that missing file has gone." Over the following 2 days, the mansion's atmosphere shifted into something quieter and more watchful. Dante's men monitored Marco's movements discreetly, while Elena and Dante worked together late into the night, reconstructing the missing summary from memory and from the original source documents that remained safely locked away. The work brought them closer together in a way neither of them had anticipated. Long hours spent side by side at the desk, exhaustion softening the careful distance both had maintained since the night they first met. "You remind me of him," Dante said quietly one night, long after Sophia and the household staff had gone to sleep. the study lit only by a single lamp, casting warm light across the scattered papers between them. Of who? Your father. I met him once, years ago, before any of this began. He came to discuss a business matter with my father, and even then, he had this same quality you have. A refusal to look away from difficult truths, even when looking away would have been far easier and far safer. Elena felt her throat tighten unexpectedly at the mention of her father, the grief she had carried for 3 years rising sharply to the surface. I wish I could remember him the way you seem to. I mostly remember trying to piece together what happened after he was gone, trying to make sense of a death everyone else seemed content to simply accept. You never accepted it, Dante said, watching her carefully. That took more courage than most people possess. The quiet sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the weight of the moment settling between them in a way that felt different from the careful professional distance they had maintained until then. Elena looked away first, uncertain how to respond to the warmth she saw in his expression, warmth that seemed entirely at odds with the reputation that preceded him. We should focus on Marco, she said finally, breaking the silence. Before he realizes we're closing in. Dante nodded, though something in his expression suggested the moment between them had not gone unnoticed by either of them, a shift neither was quite ready to name aloud. The following evening, one of Dante's men reported that Marco had left the mansion grounds under the pretense of a routine supply errand, but had instead driven to a location on the edge of the city known to be connected to Kovic family operations. Dante's expression turned to stone as he received the report, the confirmation of Marco's betrayal now undeniable. We move tonight, Dante said, already reaching for his coat. I want him brought back here before he has the chance to warn anyone else. Let me come with you, Elena said immediately. Absolutely not. Dante's tone left no room for argument. This is exactly the kind of danger I promised to keep you away from. You stay here, with Sophia, protected. Dante, I have spent 3 years trying to find the person responsible for my father's death. I am not going to sit upstairs while you confront him. For a moment, it seemed as though Dante might refuse outright, but something in Elena's expression, the same fierce determination he had noticed the very first night in the warehouse, seemed to convince him that arguing further would accomplish nothing. You stay in the car, he said finally, his voice firm. No matter what happens, you do not leave the car until I tell you it is safe. Do you understand? Elena nodded, though the anxiety twisting in her stomach told her that whatever happened tonight would change everything that came after it. The drive to the location Marco had visited took nearly 40 minutes, winding through parts of the city Elena had never seen before. Industrial streets lined with warehouses and shuttered storefronts, the kind of place where a person could disappear without anyone noticing for days. Dante's men followed in a separate vehicle, and as they approached the address, the tension in the car grew thick enough to feel physically present. They parked a block away, and Dante turned to look at Elena one final time before stepping out. Stay here. Whatever you hear, whatever you see, stay in this car. Elena watched him disappear into the darkness alongside 2 of his men, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it over the quiet hum of the car's engine. Minutes passed slowly, each one stretching longer than the last, until finally she saw movement near the building, shadows shifting against the dim streetlight, voices rising just enough for fragments to carry across the distance. She could not make out the words clearly, but she could hear the anger in Dante's voice, sharp and controlled, and another voice responding, defensive and increasingly desperate. The confrontation seemed to stretch on for what felt like hours, though Elena knew it could only have been minutes, before the sound of raised voices finally quieted and the shapes near the building began moving back toward the cars. When Dante returned, his expression was unreadable, though something in the set of his shoulders told her the confrontation had confirmed everything they suspected. Well, Elena asked, unable to wait any longer. Was it him? It was him, Dante said quietly, sliding into the seat beside her, his voice carrying an exhaustion that went beyond the physical. He confessed everything. The Kovacs approached him nearly 4 years ago, offered him a portion of profits in exchange for helping move money and covering the trail. He said your father discovered the pattern almost immediately after it began. Elena's breath caught. Did he confirm what happened to my father? Dante's silence answered before his words did, and when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something that sounded almost like guilt. He said the order came from the Kovac side, not from him directly, but that he provided the information that made it possible. He knew what would happen when he passed along the location of your father's meeting that night. He let it happen because stopping it would have exposed his own involvement. The confirmation, after 3 years of searching, should have felt like relief. Instead, Elena felt a wave of anger so sharp it left her shaking. The reality of her father's betrayal by someone within an organization he had trusted enough to work near finally laid bare in full detail. "What happens to him now?" she asked quietly. "He will face consequences within this organization for his betrayal," Dante said carefully. "But the Kovacs remain the greater threat. They ordered your father's death, and now that Marco's exposure has likely already reached them, they will know we are closing in on the truth. They will not wait to see what we do next." The weight of that warning settled over both of them heavily as the car pulled away from the industrial street, heading back toward the mansion through the quiet, dark streets of the city. Elena stared out the window. The confirmation of her father's murder finally secured after 3 long years, and yet the sense of danger surrounding them both felt sharper now than it ever had before. Whatever peace she had hoped this truth might bring her had not arrived. Instead, it had opened a door to something far more dangerous, a war that had, until now, remained quiet and hidden, but that was about to become impossible to ignore. Every gate on the mansion grounds closed at once the following morning, the heavy iron barriers grinding shut with a sound that echoed through the quiet property, and Elena understood immediately that whatever calm had existed inside these walls was now gone completely. "What's happening?" she asked, finding Dante in the security office, surrounded by monitors showing every entrance to the estate, guards visible on nearly every screen, moving with a tense urgency she had not seen before. "The Kovacs know we exposed Marco," Dante said without looking away from the screens. "One of my men intercepted communication overnight, confirming they are aware their operation inside my organization has been compromised. That means they know we are close to proving their involvement in your father's death, and they know you are here, inside my home." Elena felt a chill move through her despite the warmth of the room. "They're going to come after me. They are going to try." Dante finally turned to look at her, his expression harder than she had ever seen it, though beneath the hardness, she could see something else, a fierce protectiveness that had grown steadily since the night he first brought her into this house. "Which is why, as of this morning, no one enters or leaves this property without my direct authorization. The mansion is sealed." Sophia appeared in the doorway then, her expression tight with worry as she looked between her brother and Elena. "The staff has been briefed. Everyone knows to report anything unusual immediately. But Dante, if the Kovacs are as desperate as you believe, sealing the gates may not be enough." "It will be enough," Dante said, his voice leaving no room for doubt, though Elena could see the effort it took him to maintain that certainty. "I have more men here than they could send without starting a war. They are not prepared to fight openly. What they will try instead is something quieter, an opportunity, a moment of weakness in our security they can exploit." Over the following 2 days, the mansion existed in a state of controlled tension. Guards doubled at every entrance, the household staff moving through their duties with visible unease, and Elena finding herself increasingly restless within walls that had begun to feel less like protection and more like confinement. She spent hours in the study reviewing her father's records with Dante, searching for any additional detail that might strengthen their case against the Kovac family. But concentration proved difficult, with the constant awareness of danger pressing against every quiet moment. It was on the 3rd night of the lockdown that the danger finally arrived. quietly and without warning, exactly as Dante had predicted it would. Elena woke to the sound of a door opening somewhere down the corridor, faint but unmistakable in the deep silence of the sleeping house. She lay still for a moment, telling herself it was nothing, a guard on routine rounds, Sophia unable to sleep. But something about the quality of the silence that followed felt wrong, deliberate in a way that ordinary movement through the house never was. She rose quietly and crossed to her door, easing it open just enough to look down the darkened corridor. A shape moved near the far end, too tall to be Sophia, too careful in its movements to be a member of the household staff going about ordinary business. Elena's breath caught in her throat, and she eased her door closed again, her heart pounding as she searched for the small device Dante had given her days earlier, insisting she keep it close in case of exactly this kind of emergency. Her fingers found it in the drawer of the writing desk, and she pressed the single button on its surface, praying the alert would reach security before whoever was moving through the corridor reached her door. The silence stretched unbearably as she pressed herself against the wall beside the door, listening to footsteps growing closer, slow and deliberate, pausing occasionally as though checking each room along the way. When the footsteps finally stopped directly outside her door, Elena felt time slow to something unbearable, every instinct screaming at her to run even though there was nowhere in the room to go. The door handle turned slowly, and Elena held her breath, pressing further into the shadow beside the doorframe, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it could be heard through the walls. The door swung open just as running footsteps thundered down the corridor, and a shout rang out, sharp and commanding, followed immediately by the sound of a struggle in the hallway. Elena's door was shoved wider as the intruder turned to face the new threat, and in the brief chaos of the confrontation, she caught only a glimpse of the man's face before Dante himself appeared, moving with a speed and precision that left no room for uncertainty about his intentions. The struggle ended quickly, the intruder subdued and restrained by two of Dante's men who arrived moments later, and Elena finally allowed herself to exhale, her legs unsteady as the adrenaline that had flooded her system began to fade, leaving exhaustion and fear in its place. Dante crossed the distance between them in 3 quick strides, his hands finding her shoulders as he studied her face with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I'm fine," Elena managed, her voice shakier than she intended. He didn't get close enough. Dante's grip on her shoulders tightened briefly before he pulled her into an embrace that neither of them seemed to fully anticipate, his arms wrapping around her with a fierce protectiveness that spoke louder than any words could have. Elena, still trembling from the encounter, found herself sinking into the warmth of it, the sense of safety she had been chasing for 3 years finally settling over her in a way she had never expected to find in the arms of a man like Dante Marchetti. "I should never have let this happen," Dante said quietly, his voice tight with anger, directed entirely at himself. "I sealed the mansion, I doubled the guards, and someone still got close enough to reach your door. You caught him," Elena said, pulling back just enough to look up at him. "You got here in time. I should not have needed to cut it that close." Dante's jaw tightened, and Elena could see the guilt he carried, the same fierce responsibility that had driven him to take her under his protection in the first place, now compounding into something heavier. "This ends now. Whatever it takes, I will make certain the Kovacs understand exactly what happens to people who threaten what belongs to me." The words settled between them with unexpected weight, and Elena found herself studying his face, searching for the meaning behind it. "Belongs to me." It echoed the question he had asked her that first night in the warehouse, a question she had answered then with defiance, uncertain of its true meaning. Now, standing in the aftermath of an attack that had come dangerously close to ending everything, the question felt different, heavier, tangled with something neither of them had fully acknowledged until this moment. The captured intruder was taken to be questioned separately, and by morning, Dante's men had confirmed what everyone already suspected. He had been sent by the Kovac family specifically to eliminate Elena before she could provide any further evidence against them. His instructions clear and his payment already secured in advance. The confirmation only deepened the resolve Dante had already begun to form, a resolve that Elena watched harden into something unstoppable over the following days. "We are not simply defending against them any longer," Dante told his assembled men the next morning, Elena standing quietly at the edge of the room, watching him command the space with an authority that left no doubt about his intentions. "We move against the Kovac family directly. Every piece of evidence Elena and her father gathered, combined with Marco's confession, gives us everything we need to expose their operation entirely, to the authorities and to every family connected to this city who has ever questioned their legitimacy." The plan that followed was meticulous, built over the following days with a precision that reflected years of experience navigating a world where a single mistake could prove fatal. Elena found herself an active participant throughout, her knowledge of her father's records proving essential in identifying exactly which pieces of evidence would prove most damning, which connections would unravel the Kovac operation most completely. Through it all, something between her and Dante continued shifting, deepening in ways neither of them addressed directly, but that both clearly felt. Quiet moments in the study stretched longer than necessary. Glances held a beat too long. The careful distance that had defined their earliest days together had eroded almost entirely, replaced by something neither of them seemed ready to name, but that grew more undeniable with each passing day. Sophia noticed it too, watching the two of them with a knowing expression that she wisely kept mostly to herself, though she did comment quietly to Elena one evening, "I have never seen my brother fight for anything the way he is fighting for you. Be careful what you do with that." Elena did not know how to respond, uncertain herself of exactly what she felt, only that the fear and grief that had defined the past 3 years of her life had begun, slowly and unexpectedly, to make room for something else entirely. The night before the plan against the Kovacs was set to begin, Elena found Dante alone in the study, staring at the assembled evidence spread across his desk, exhaustion evident in the set of his shoulders, despite the determination that had not wavered since the attack on her door. "Tomorrow changes everything," he said quietly, not looking up as she entered. "Whatever happens, the Kovac family's operation ends. Your father's death will finally be answered for." Elena crossed the room and stood beside him, looking down at the evidence that represented 3 years of her own relentless searching. Now finally on the verge of delivering the justice she had almost given up hope of ever finding. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said quietly, "I need you to know that none of this would have been possible without you, without this house, without the protection you gave me when you had every reason to see me only as a threat." Dante turned to look at her then, and the weight in his expression carried something far beyond the strategy and danger that had consumed them both for days. "I did not protect you because I saw an opportunity, Elena. I protected you because from the very first night, something about you made it impossible for me to consider any other choice." The confession hung between them, quiet and undeniable, and Elena felt the last of her careful distance dissolve entirely as she looked up at him, understanding at last exactly what had been building between them since that first terrifying night in the warehouse. Tomorrow would bring danger neither of them could fully predict, but tonight, standing together in the quiet study of a house that had become, against every expectation, something closer to a home than a prison, both of them understood that whatever answer waited at the end of this fight, they would face it together. Every phone in the mansion rang at once the following evening, the coordinated signal that the plan against the Kovac family had reached its final stage, and Elena felt her pulse spike as Dante rose from his desk, his expression settling into the focused calm of a man about to finish something years in the making. "Stay with Sophia," he told her, already moving toward the door. "The evidence has been delivered to the authorities. My men are securing the physical locations where the Kovac operation stores its records. By tonight, this ends. Let me come to the handoff location. Elena said. I need to see this through. After everything, I need to be there when it finally ends. Dante hesitated. The protective instinct that had defined his treatment of her since the very beginning, warring visibly with his understanding of exactly how much this moment meant to her. Finally, he nodded. You stay beside me the entire time. No exceptions. The location chosen for the final confrontation was a quiet office building downtown, selected specifically because it sat on neutral ground, unaffiliated with either family, chosen to ensure the authorities arriving to review the evidence would not appear to be walking into a trap set by either side. Elena sat beside Dante in the car as they approached, her hands clasped tightly together. 3 years of searching finally converging into a single evening that would determine everything that came next. Inside the building, representatives from both families gathered in a tense standoff. The head of the Kovac family present in person, flanked by his own guards, his expression carrying the strained composure of a man who understood exactly how thoroughly his operation had been exposed. Elena recognized him from photographs her father had once kept, though seeing him now, faced directly with the consequences of what his family had done, brought a complicated wave of emotion she had not fully prepared herself for. You have no proof that will hold up, the Kovac patriarch said coldly, addressing Dante directly, while his eyes flicked briefly, dismissively, toward Elena. Whatever this woman has convinced you to believe, it changes nothing. The proof does not need to convince me, Dante replied evenly. It needs to convince the authorities who are already reviewing it as we speak, and the other families across this city who have spent years wondering exactly how deeply your organization has been willing to reach in order to protect its secrets. Marco's confession alone confirms everything Adrian Voss discovered years ago. The financial records confirm the rest. The Kovac patriarch's composure cracked slightly, his gaze shifting toward Elena with something that bordered on genuine hatred. Your father should have minded his own business. My father minded exactly the business he was hired to review, Elena said, her voice steady, despite the anger rising sharply inside her. He found corruption, and instead of allowing it to be addressed properly, your family had him killed to protect a secret that is now being exposed anyway. Everything you tried to prevent by taking his life has happened regardless. You simply made certain it happened 3 years later than it should have, and that he was not alive to see it. The silence that followed her words carried a finality that needed no further explanation. Within minutes, authorities arrived to begin formally reviewing the evidence already provided, and the Kovac patriarch, along with several of his closest associates, was taken into custody amid a confrontation that ended not with violence, as Elena had feared it might, but with the quiet, inevitable collapse of an operation built on secrets that could no longer withstand scrutiny. As the scene dispersed and the authorities began their work, Elena found herself standing outside the building in the cool evening air, the weight of 3 years finally lifting from her shoulders in a way she had never quite believed possible. Dante appeared beside her, watching her carefully, giving her the space to process the moment without pushing her toward words she was not yet ready to speak. It's over, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's over, Dante confirmed. Your father's name will finally be cleared. The truth he uncovered will be recognized for what it was, an act of courage that cost him everything, but that ultimately brought down the very people responsible for his death. Elena turned to look at him, and in his expression she saw none of the calculating coldness that had defined their first meeting in the warehouse weeks ago. What remained instead was something warmer, steadier, a version of Dante Marchetti that she suspected very few people had ever been allowed to see. They returned to the mansion in the quiet hours before dawn, the household staff and guards greeting the news of the Kovac family's collapse with visible relief, the tension that had gripped the estate for weeks finally beginning to ease. Sophia embraced Elena warmly the moment she stepped through the door, her earlier wariness long since replaced by genuine affection. You did it, Sophia said. You actually did it. We did it, Elena corrected gently, glancing toward Dante, who stood watching the reunion with an expression she was only beginning to fully understand. Later that night, once the household had finally settled into the first peaceful rest it had known in weeks, Elena found herself back in the study where everything had truly begun, standing beside the desk where her father's files had first been spread out before her weeks earlier. Dante joined her quietly, closing the door behind him, the two of them alone in the same room where their strange, dangerous partnership had first taken root. "I never properly answered your question," Elena said, turning to face him. "That first night, in the warehouse, you asked me who I belonged to." Dante's expression grew still, watching her carefully, waiting. "I told you I belonged to no one," Elena continued, "that I belonged only to the truth. And for 3 years, that was the only thing I had, a single purpose, carried alone, because I did not believe I had anyone left to trust." She stepped closer, her heart steady despite the vulnerability of the moment. "But that is no longer true. Somewhere along the way, in this house, with you, I found something I stopped believing I would ever have again." Dante closed the remaining distance between them, his hand rising gently to her face, his eyes searching hers with a depth of feeling neither of them had allowed themselves to fully acknowledge until now. "And what is that?" he asked quietly, though the question carried none of the demanding edge it once had. "I belong here," Elena said simply, "with you. Not because you sealed this mansion to protect me from danger, but because somewhere inside these walls, I stopped feeling like I was fighting alone." The words settled between them with a quiet certainty that needed no further explanation, and when Dante finally closed the last small distance between them, the moment carried none of the fear or danger that had defined their first meeting, only the steady, hard-won peace of two people who had found, in the unlikeliest of circumstances, exactly where they were meant to be. In the weeks that followed, the mansion that had once been sealed against danger slowly opened again, though something fundamental about it had changed permanently. The gates still closed each evening, the guards still patrolled the grounds with careful vigilance, but the atmosphere inside had shifted from one of fear to something closer to genuine belonging. Sophia often remarked, with a knowing smile, that the house had never felt more like a true home than it did now, filled not just with the business of the Marchetti family, but with the quiet, steady presence of the woman who had walked into it as a stranger and stayed as something far more permanent. Elena visited her father's grave for the first time in months, not long after the Kovac family's collapse became public knowledge, standing quietly beside the headstone with a peace she had not felt in 3 long years. She told him, softly, that the truth he had died protecting had finally come to light, that the people responsible had finally faced consequences, and that she had found, in the process of finishing what he started, something she never expected to find at all, a place where she truly belonged. Dante stood a respectful distance away during that visit, giving her the space she needed, though when she finally turned back toward him, he was there waiting, exactly as he had been through every difficult moment since the night they first met. Together, they returned to the mansion that had once been sealed in fear, now standing instead as a testament to everything they had fought to protect, and to the unlikely bond that had grown, stronger than either of them could have predicted, from the ashes of a truth neither of them had been willing to let go unanswered.